My message this morning is entitled Hurried and Worried, or Centered and Calm. Hurried and worried, or centered and calm. Say that with me. Hurried and worried, or centered and calm. How many of you would agree that though we are living in a day and age where we certainly have more freedom and more conveniences and more choices, that we also seem to be more stressed, more overwhelmed, more depressed, and more challenged than any generation before us? How many of you would agree? That's a vast majority of us, Do you think words such as stressed, anxious, overwhelmed, overworked are words that describe what it is to be spiritually awake and enlightened? No. When you think of the spiritual masters and leaders, when you think of Jesus or Lao Tzu or the Buddha, do you have an image of a stressed out, overworked, overwhelmed being? I didn't think so. I don't either. And when I've had the privilege of sitting with contemporary spiritual masters and teachers, whether it's Eckhart Tolle or Adyashanti or Thich Nhat Hanh or Pema Chodron or His Holiness the Dalai Lama, what I have seen and felt as I have spent time with them is someone that is centered and calm, not hurried and worried. How did they get there? I think they got there by practice. I think they got there by paying attention, and paying attention to that which is important, which requires the act of discernment. I want to read to you a story out of the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke, that in many ways is a story about paying attention, a story about discernment, so that as we get better at paying attention, as we get better at discerning, we are able to experience much more of a feeling of centeredness and calmness than hurry and worry. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," Jesus answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." Let me give a little bit of context to this story. So first of all, Jesus and his disciples were actually on their way to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, mystically and metaphysically, the word means habitation of peace. So we can know that mystically and metaphysically, this story has to do with moving into a state of peace, a consciousness of peace. Elsewhere in the Gospels, we're told that Mary and Martha, sisters of Lazarus was their brother, that this whole family were very close and good friends to Jesus. And so as Jesus and his disciples are making their way to Jerusalem and wanting and needing to stop at their friend's house, the context is it would be customary to greet him with great hospitality, which would include preparing a delicious and lavish meal. And so that's what Martha is all about. She is about recognizing that the social norms are her place is to be preparing this meal for Jesus and the other guests. And she feels that Mary should be there by her side as well, because that is also the role that Mary should be playing. And yet Mary makes a different choice. Mary does something completely the opposite to what is customary and normal in that day and age. She is acting more like a disciple by sitting at Jesus' feet and listening to him and spending time with him. And so Martha is not too happy about this. And Martha has the courage to go direct. She goes directly to Jesus, and she says to Jesus, "Don't you think my sister should be helping me?" And Jesus' response, he kind of chides her when he says, "Martha, Martha, Martha, Martha." It's like, there, Martha. Martha, Martha, you are worried about many things. There is need of only one thing. And Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken away from her. So Jesus is flipping the whole situation and saying to Martha that Mary's choice in this moment is the better choice, is the right choice in that moment. Wouldn't you love to know what Martha's reaction was to Jesus' words? I wonder, did she throw her towel down in frustration and a huff? Did she decide to do something else? Or did she go back to preparing the meal? Discernment, paying attention. Let's tease apart some of the teaching points in this story. All of Jesus' parables, though this is not a parable, but all of his parables, and I believe all of his life circumstances, provide us an opportunity to learn from and are relevant today, just as they were back then. So one important teaching point is this, that our choices are shaped by our values. Our choices are shaped by our values. Say that with me. Our choices are shaped by our values. Think about that for a moment. When we value something, we make decisions and choices based upon that. The things that we don't value, we tend to ignore. Martha valued action and efficiency. Martha valued knowing what the social norms were, knowing what was expected of her, and delivering on that. Mary valued something else. Mary valued the opportunity to be with not only her friend, but her teacher. It is important for us to realize that this story is not about either or. It's not about either or. It is in part about recognizing that whatever it is we value in the long span of time or in the short time will mold and shape the kinds of choices and decisions we make. And so part of what is incredibly important to us in our spiritual practice is being clear on that which we value so that we can more consistently build our lives moment by moment, day by day, around the things that we value, the things that really are important to us. It's also important to realize that it wasn't Martha's activity that Jesus was criticizing. For centuries, this particular story has been used to juxtapose the active life against the contemplative life, as if to hold up that only the contemplative life is the value and not the active life. But that's really not true. Jesus wasn't criticizing Martha's activity. He wasn't criticizing that she was preparing a meal. If you listened carefully, you caught that what he was criticizing was the energy with which she was doing what she was doing. And this is where discernment, where paying attention also comes in. For us to pay attention to whatever it is we are doing, whether it is some physical activity that revolves around responsibility, or sitting and listening to a piece of music or a speaker, what is the energy with which we are doing it? Where is the motivation for that coming from? I would rather suspect that if Martha's energy had been different, even though she would have been preparing a meal, that Jesus would not have chided her for it. Perhaps instead of being so upset and anxious about preparing this elaborate meal, perhaps she could have made a slightly different choice. Perhaps the choice she could have made would have been to make it a little bit more simple. Or perhaps another choice she could have made would have been to delay it a little while. And instead of doing it right then and there, as what the custom might have been, to instead take the opportunity to sit with her teacher and with her friend. So it wasn't that he told her to stop preparing the meal. He just spoke to the energy with which she was doing it and pointed out that Mary's action of sitting there was going to result in a reward for Mary that could not be taken away from her. The reward being fully present to that experience. Fully present to that experience, not just going through the motions, but actually being able to be there and be with Jesus and be with whatever it was of wisdom that he was going to be departing to her. Another teaching point, I think, is really getting that this is not an either-or example. It's not that one way is always the right way and the other way is not. If we lived in a world where all we did was contemplate, the world wouldn't work very well. Would you not agree? If we lived in a world where all we were was busy all the time, we wouldn't live a very satisfying life at all. And it is one of the reasons, I think, that particularly in our generation and in our culture, we tend to feel such emptiness inside because we have gotten so good at the doing, and we have so many external rewards for doing, and doing well that we have forgotten to value the being quality as well. It's finding that balance, and here is where discernment, here is where paying attention really makes a difference. Because there are times and places in our life that we need to be much more like Martha, not with the energy that Martha had in that moment, but with the active life. And there are times that we need to be much more like Mary and set aside the action to be present to Jesus in our lives. Now, don't shut down on me. I don't mean Jesus literally. Jesus in this story is representing that which is really important. Does that make sense? Have you not had moments in your life where a friend or a loved one absolutely positively needed you to stop everything and be there for them? Have you noticed how those things don't usually happen at the most convenient time? Have you noticed that? Have you noticed how sometimes a really important conversation that your spouse or your partner or a loved one has to have requires you setting aside everything else so you can be completely and fully present, paying attention to them right there in that moment, and to not let that moment slip away? That to me is really what this balance is, in recognizing those moments where we are to stop everything else and be fully present, just like Mary was fully present, as well as recognizing that there certainly are those times in our places that we must be like Martha and be fully engaged and fully active. I think also a teaching point of this story is the importance of the fact that Mary really recognized a longing in her soul that exists, I think, in each and every one of our souls. And that is a longing for a connection with Spirit, with that which helps us feel closer to that presence and that power that some of us in this room call God. Our very soul longs for that connection. It is for so many people in the world today a gaping hole, a really empty place, because we have become so good at fulfilling all the other aspects of our life and living, from mentally, physically, and emotionally, professionally, but we kind of put the spiritual stuff over here for when we might get around to it. What would it be like if we had our spiritual life not be an afterthought, but instead of a first thought? A first thought. Do you think that if we managed to do that, that all of the rest of the other parts of our life might actually flow a little bit better? I think so. I think so. So how do we do that? How do we fulfill that longing for God? How do we fulfill that craving for deep spiritual connection? There are many ways that we do it. I do believe that coming together in community, singing together and praying together and learning and growing together and serving together is one way. I know that sitting in prayer and meditation is absolutely another way. I know that it can be moment-to-moment choices that we make, very simple things that we do that are even less structured. It might be that the very first thing we do every single morning before we get out of our bed is we pause for just a moment. As we take a deep breath in, we say simply, "Thank you, God, for the gift of this day." Feeding our soul in that tiny little moment of life. Maybe it is every single time we sit down for a meal, whether it is a fancy one or not, that we pause for just a moment and we think about the journey that food has made just to be in our home so that it can feed our bodies. But as we make that connection and just give thanks for that, we are not just feeding our bodies, we are reconnecting with the truth that we are a part of the full fabric and circle of life. Maybe we feed our soul by adopting a simple practice that every single time we come to a red light or a stop sign, that we're going to think of one thing we are grateful for. You see, making our spiritual life an active part of our everyday living is what helps us to move from that place of being hurried and worried and like so much of race consciousness and so much of humanity to a place of being centered and calm no matter what is going on around us. And that is the real test. That is the real key. To be able to be centered and calm, not just when you're in a room with beautiful chanting and meditation and everybody else is quiet and still and the phones aren't ringing and there's no demands on your time, but to be able to do that in the midst of chaos in your life. You see, we do not sit and meditate together or individually at home just so we can be good meditators. Did you know that? That's not the reason we do it? What do you think the reason we do it is? You're saying it so we can be calm and centered, connected with Spirit in our regular lives. In our regular lives. We practice in moments, informal moments, in those times that we sit in the morning or the evening or whenever you do your personal prayer work or meditation work. We practice then. But that is practice in training for real life. For real life. It is to be able to discern. It is to be able to pay attention. It is to be able to read the signs of your life, nobody else's life, and to know what is being called from by you in that moment. Is it to be more like Martha, without Martha's upset and anxious energy, but to be about the doing and the action? Or is it to be like Mary and not miss the moment that is right here with you, to be savored and enjoyed before it is gone forever? Namaste.